By the time Isolde Vane reached the Black Chapel, the bells had already begun to toll like iron striking bone. They were not wedding bells in any human sense. No village girls leaned from windows to scatter petals. No mother wept with joy. No priest smiled beneath a candlelit altar. The bells of Drearhillow Keep rang only for law, burial, and blood. Tonight they rang for all three. The chapel stood on the cliff's edge, its spires clawing at a sky drowned in cloud. Below, the sea battered the rock like some beast desperate to get in. Inside, the old nobility of the night watched from the pews in motionless rows. Pale women in silver veils, men in dark velvet with signet rings like little seals of doom. And above them, all the cold gaze of the coven elders, seated as if in judgment rather than witness. Isolde kept her hands folded so no one would see them tremble. She had been given no choice in this marriage. After her father's debts swallowed the last of the Vane estate, after her brother sold what remained of their honor by gambling away ancestral land, and finally her future, she had been sent north as tribute. A human bride for Lord Valerian Duskmere, master of Drearhillow, ancient patron of the border provinces, widower 4 times over. Every bride died from his bite. Everyone knew it. No one said it aloud. The words breathed anyway through the chapel like a hidden draft. She had heard them since childhood in ruined drawing rooms and candle-starved corridors. The first bride had been noble, the second devout, the third came from the eastern marsh lords, the fourth had been scarcely older than Isolde. Each had stood where she now stood. Each had knelt for the binding bite, each had collapsed before dawn, and still the coven demanded another marriage. Coven law, her brother had said with shaking greed, an old treaty. A blood union to keep the dead awake in their graves and the living villages unharried. You will be honored there. But no one ever used the word sacrifice when there was a prettier lie available. The doors at the far end of the chapel opened without sound. Lord Valerian entered as though the darkness itself had taken shape and learned restraint. He wore black so severe it erased the line between cloth and shadow. Silver glinted only once, at his throat, where an old crest rested against skin too pale for life. He was tall, but it was not height that stilled the air. It was his stillness. He moved with the terrible economy of a creature who had no need to prove power, because power had long ago become part of the room around him. Isolde did not lift her chin in defiance. She could not have if she tried, but she looked at him. That at least remained hers. His face was beautiful in the way winter ruins were beautiful, severe, noble, and touched by something irretrievable. His mouth held no cruelty. That frightened her more. Cruel men could be named. Men who looked as though they had buried cruelty beneath duty were far more dangerous. His gaze rested on her for one measured second. Something unreadable passed through it. Not hunger, not pity. Recognition, perhaps, or grief so ancient it had forgotten its own name. The elder of the coven rose. By law of ash and blood, under moon concealed and sea unresting, this union is called. No one objected. No one ever would. The ritual progressed with cold precision. Isolde repeated vows that were older than the kingdom itself. She promised obedience not as a servant, but as one bound to shared fate. Valerian vowed protection, provision, and custody of her blood before all others. The words sounded almost tender until one understood that in this place, tenderness could be another form of possession. When they stood before the altar, the elder brought forth the binding blade and cut Isolde's palm. A thin, bright line of blood appeared. The chapel inhaled. Valerian extended his own hand. The elder cut him too. His blood was darker, not black, not unnatural, but heavy-looking, as if night had dissolved into it. Their hands were pressed together. Heat shot up Isolde's arm, wrong and swift. She almost gasped. The blood that mingled between their palms seemed to cling rather than run. For one strange moment she felt not the chapel, not the sea, not her own body, but a door somewhere in the dark scraping open by 1 inch. Valerian's jaw tightened. Only then did she see the tension beneath his control. He did not want this. The discovery should have comforted her. Instead, it made the moment more terrible, because if such a man feared the ritual, Then the ritual deserved fear. The elder's voice became softer. To seal the union, the Lord drinks. A woman in the first pew lowered her eyes. Another quietly crossed herself in some remnant human habit she had never quite abandoned. Isolde's breath turned shallow. This was the part that killed them. Valerian stepped closer. The candles shivered as if from his nearness alone. He placed one hand lightly, so lightly, at the back of her neck. The gesture was formal, almost reverent, but his touch, even through her hair, sent a cold awareness through her skin. "Look at me," he said. His voice was low and beautifully ruined. She obeyed. If death was coming, she would not meet it begging. His eyes were not red with monstrous appetite, as childhood tales had promised. They were dark gray, storm-colored, edged with old exhaustion. She saw something there now unmistakable and terrible: resistance. He was holding himself back from something beyond mere hunger. The cords in his throat shifted once. Then he bent. His mouth touched the place beneath her ear. The first pain was small, a needle of shock. The second was not pain at all, but a violent sensation of falling inward. The chapel vanished. The sea vanished. She felt cold corridors, 1,000 sleepless nights, a crypt beneath the keep, and a man kneeling alone with blood on his hands. None of it was hers, yet it flooded her. A cry rose in the chapel, not from her, from the witnesses. Valerian tore himself back as if burned. Blood slid warm down Isolde's neck. She swayed. The room tipped. Someone whispered, "It has happened again." But she did not die. The elder stood so abruptly his chair struck stone. Murmurs erupted in ragged disbelief. Isolde pressed a hand to her throat and found her pulse racing, wild but whole. She was alive. Alive. Valerian stared at her as though she had risen from a grave in front of him. Then the chapel candles all went out at once. In the darkness, something ancient beneath Drearhillow answered the bite with a single, thunderous knock. And Lord Valerian said, with quiet horror, "No." It should not have woken. When the candles relit, they did so one by one, without human hands. The coven elders called it a sign before anyone dared call it a disaster. Isolde remained standing only because her knees had forgotten how to surrender. Blood cooled at her throat. Valerian had stepped back, but not far. His presence stayed before her like a wall no one could pass. The nobles were whispering openly now. "She lives," the crypt answered. "The bond took. No bride survives the first seal." The eldest matriarch, Lady Severine, descended from her raised chair, with the stiff grace of old bones, disguised by immortal flesh. Her face was as smooth as polished ivory, though her eyes betrayed an age beyond kindness. "The bride will be taken below," she said. "At once." Valerian's answer came flat. "No." That single word changed the room. A lesser man might have shouted. Valerian did not need to. Refusal in him was a kind of architecture. Severine's gaze hardened. "Coven law compels examination when an omen follows ritual. Coven law," he said, "does not compel me to surrender my wife bleeding." Wife. The word fell strangely over Isolde, like a velvet cloth over a coffin. She should have hated it. Instead, she felt only the absurd shock of still being present to hear it. The matriarch studied him. "You resist too fiercely for a man whose marriages have always ended in obedience." A silence followed that might have drawn blood if silence were sharp enough. Then Valerian turned to Isolde. "Can you walk?" The question itself startled her. Not will you, not must you, can you? She swallowed against the ache in her throat. "Yes," he offered no arm. Perhaps he knew she would not have taken it before the whole coven. He merely moved beside her, and together they left the altar beneath the staring assembly. The chapel doors opened. The corridor beyond was colder than the sanctuary, lined with ancestral portraits so darkened by age their eyes seemed painted from soot. Only when the doors shut behind them did Isolde's legs falter. Valerian caught her elbow instantly, fingers firm and cool through silk. She stiffened. He released her at once. "I beg your pardon," he said. It was more unnerving than if he had said nothing at all. Two attendants waited, human women in gray gowns with lowered eyes. At a gesture from Valerian, they approached to cleanse the blood from Isolde's neck and lead her toward the bridal chamber. Before they could touch her, a tremor moved through the floor, subtle but unmistakable. Dust whispered from the ribs of the ceiling. Everyone froze. The nearest attendant crossed herself. Valerian looked toward the western passage, where the keep's oldest foundations lay buried in cliffstone and crypt. His face had gone remote in a way that frightened her more than open fear. "What woke?" Isolde asked. He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was carefully empty. "Something that should have remained asleep." The attendants led her upward through a spiral stair and into a chamber too grand for comfort. The bed hangings were wine dark. A fire burned low. Tall windows faced the sea, their panes webbed with rain. On a chair nearby, someone had laid fresh linen and a high-necked gown of midnight blue, as if they expected a bride to change peacefully after a ceremony of near-death. The older attendant, Marta, dabbed away the blood with warm water scented faintly with rosemary. Her hands shook. "Do all your brides have chambers prepared this carefully?" Isolde asked before she could stop herself. Marta's eyes flicked upward, startled by the question. "My lady, answer honestly." A pause. "They did not have." The younger woman nearly dropped the basin. Isolde said no more. She felt too cold, too conscious of her own throat, too aware that somewhere below this room, the stone of the keep had answered the taste of her living blood. When the attendants finished, they withdrew, leaving her alone with the fire and the sea. She should have wept then, perhaps. A gentler girl might have. But sorrow had lived with Isolde so long it no longer arrived as tears. It arrived as steadiness, as the quiet with which she folded her hands in her lap and stared into the hearth. She had not died. That miracle did not yet feel merciful. Near midnight, the chamber door opened. Valerian entered carrying a shallow silver cup. He had removed the ceremonial coat. Without it, he looked less regal, more dangerous somehow, as if stripped nearer to some essential severity. A fresh stain marked his cuff, not hers. He set the cup on the table between them. "Drink." She did not move. "What is it?" "Medicine for the bite." She looked at the liquid. It was dark with herbs, not blood. "Will it kill me?" His eyes lifted to hers. "No." Something in her, strained beyond propriety and fear, answered with a thread of bleak honesty. "That would be inconvenient after such effort to keep me alive." For the first time, his expression altered, not to a smile, but to the shadow of one that grief had interrupted centuries ago. "Drink," he repeated, softer. She obeyed. The medicine was bitter enough to sting her tongue. Warmth spread slowly through her chest. He remained standing. His restraint filled the room more than movement would have. At last she said, "You knew I was supposed to die." He did not insult her with denial. "Yes, and yet you looked horrified when I did not." "Yes." She set the cup down with careful fingers. "Then tell me what I am in this house." His gaze dropped briefly to the bandage at her throat, then returned to her face. "At present," he said, "you are the first woman in 83 years to survive me." The fire shifted. "That is not an answer." "No." He looked toward the rain-washed panes. "It is the only truth I can safely give tonight." Safely for whom? This time the silence lengthened until she wondered if he would leave without another word. Instead he said, "There is a crypt beneath this keep older than my line and older than the coven that governs it. Every bride who died from my bite kept it sealed." "You lived." His voice roughened almost imperceptibly. "That has consequences." A coldness far deeper than weather moved through her. "What is in the crypt?" Valerian finally turned fully toward her. In the low firelight, his face looked carved from mourning. "My first sin," he said. Then someone screamed below the floorboards. Not the shriek of a startled servant, but the tearing cry of a man seeing death. Valerian was gone before the echo faded, leaving the door open, the fire hissing, and Isolde alone with the impossible knowledge that beneath her bridal chamber, something had begun to climb. The scream did not come again. That was worse. If terror cries out only once, it means either rescue was immediate or silence was. In Drearhollow, Isolde suspected silence triumphed more often. She sat motionless for several heartbeats after Valerian vanished. Then endurance, which had always worn the face of obedience until it was needed for courage, rose in her. She took the candle from the mantel and left the chamber. The corridors beyond were long, arched, and almost entirely empty. The keep seemed to listen to itself. Wind pressed wet fingers against the windows. Somewhere in the lower levels, steps sounded quick, then cut off. No alarm bell rang, no servants flooded the halls. Whatever had occurred below, the house had decided to hide it. Isolde descended one flight, then another. At the turn of the second stair, she heard voices from an unlit hall. "Must be contained before dawn." "Severine," a man answered, one of the elders perhaps. "If the seal has weakened, then it is the girl." "The girl is incidental," Severine said. "The Lord is the problem. He should have taken the fifth bride fully. Mercy has made him careless." Isolde stopped in the shadows, candle shielded by her hand. Another voice, female and sharp as a nail. "He has been careless since Elira." The name landed strangely, not because she knew it, but because the speakers hated it. Severine answered coldly. "We do not speak of the dead with sentiment." "No," said the sharp woman, "but we do count them. 4 brides, a crypt waking, a human still breathing. If the law has failed, the council must choose another instrument. And what would you suggest? Slay Duskmere. Tear out the root and let the whole coast fall to what sleeps beneath." The hall went quiet. Isolde took one slow breath backward, then another. "Elira, the first sin, 4 brides, mercy." Before she could retreat, a hand closed over the candle flame and snuffed it in darkness. She nearly cried out, but another hand covered her mouth with swift, cool precision. "Be still, Valerian." He drew her into the recess between 2 pillars. Moonlight touched only the edge of his cheek. His body shielded hers from the hall. Too close. Not improper in intent, yet close enough that she could feel the static strain running through him. The voices beyond continued, unaware. He removed his hand from her mouth immediately. "You should not be here. You left me with screaming under the floor." A muscle moved in his jaw. "So you came toward danger. I came toward truth." His eyes held hers in the dark. For one suspended moment, she thought he might tell her to go back like a child dismissed from adult matters. Instead, he leaned slightly, not nearer to her, but nearer to the voices. "Listen then," he murmured. Severine spoke again. "The bride must be watched. If she dreams, if she sees, if the bond deepens, we will know whether the crypt answered her blood or his weakness." "And if both?" asked the other woman. "Then we cut one from the other." Footsteps approached the end of the hall. Valerian caught Isolde's wrist and led her soundlessly away through a side passage hidden behind a torn arras. The passage narrowed into an old service stair, unused and thick with dust. He did not release her until they stood within a small chamber lined with books and shuttered from the sea. A study, perhaps once private, he let go. Isolde pressed a hand to the wall just to feel something solid. "They mean to kill me." "Yes." The bluntness of it steadied her more than comfort would have. "And you?" He turned away. The study's only lamp cast amber over shelves and maps, over a desk scored by old blades, over a portrait turned face down beside a stack of sealed letters. "I have not yet decided," he said. She stared at him, that absurdly hurt. Not because she expected affection, nor safety, nor loyalty from the creature who had bitten her beneath a chapel full of witnesses, but because some desperate hidden part of her had believed he might at least object. He must have sensed it, because his next words came lower. "If I meant you dead tonight, you would not be standing. Then why say such a thing? Because half-truths are what built this keep. And I am weary of them." He moved to the desk and poured dark liquid into a glass. Not blood, she thought, though she was no longer sure what counted as ordinary here. He did not drink. He merely stood with the glass untouched in hand, looking older than the stone around him. At last she said, "Who was Elira?" The glass cracked, not shattered. Cracked, stem to bowl, beneath the pressure of his fingers. He set it down without looking at it. "My first wife, the one in the crypt." "No," his voice changed at once, becoming more dangerous for being quieter. "The one I failed before the crypt." Rain struck the shutters. The house seemed to lean nearer. He crossed to the turned portrait on the desk and righted it. A woman looked back from the canvas, dark-haired, grave, lovely in a way that had nothing to do with prettiness. Not Isolde, not even close. Yet something in the eyes, not their shape, but the sadness held with dignity, made Isolde go still. "You think I resemble her," she said. Valerian's expression closed. "No one resembles the dead. That is why grief is so persistent." He turned the portrait face down again. From elsewhere in the keep came a dull impact, as if a heavy door had been struck from the opposite side. Once, then again. Isolde whispered, "What is trying to get out?" His gaze lifted to the floor beneath their feet, as though he could see through wood, stone, and centuries. "When I was not much older than you," he said, "I loved a woman the coven forbade me to keep." The confession entered the room like cold water. "She was human, yes, and they killed her." He shut his eyes once. "They taught me to." Isolde forgot the bite, the law, the danger. For one shocked moment, she saw not a lord of death but a man eternally standing inside his worst memory. The impact sounded again, louder. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Valerian opened his eyes. Hunger did not live in them now, horror did. "When I buried her," he said, "I buried something with her. It was meant to sleep forever." Then the study door burst open behind Isolde. A servant stumbled in, bloodless with terror, and gasped, "My lord, the crypt door is open." The crypt lay beneath the oldest wing of Drearhollow, below chapel and cellar and memory. Valerian did not permit Isolde to follow. She followed anyway, not openly. He moved too fast for that, descending with 3 armed retainers and a storm lantern that threw monstrous shadows down the spiral stair. Isolde waited only until the echo of their steps thinned, then gathered her skirts and went after them by the lesser stair she had seen behind the kitchens earlier that morning. It smelled of salt and old lime, as though the sea had once tried to claim these lower stones and failed. At the bottom, she found a corridor carved directly from bedrock. Torches burned in iron brackets. The air was colder there, wrongly cold, the cold of sealed places newly disturbed. She heard voices before she saw light. "Nothing inside," said one retainer, trying and failing to sound relieved. Valerian answered, "Nothing visible." Isolde stopped just beyond the arch and looked in. The crypt chamber was circular, its domed ceiling painted long ago with stars now dimmed by soot. 6 stone biers stood in alcoves. 5 were occupied by carved effigies of veiled brides. The 6th alcove was empty, its lid broken on the floor. At the center of the chamber, a door of black iron hung open inward, not a human-sized door. A threshold cut low into the base of the crypt wall, narrow but deep, marked with silver script that had blistered from the hinges as if burned away. Beyond it spread a darkness so dense it seemed almost material. Valerian stood before that opening in utter stillness. He was listening. Isolde became aware of another sound beneath the hush, a pulse. Slow, distant, not her own, not anyone's. The stone itself seemed to carry it. One of the retainers turned and saw her. His alarm drew the other's eyes. Valerian did not look surprised, only tired in some fatal old way. "You were instructed to remain upstairs." "I was also left ignorant," she said. A lesser noble might have rebuked her. He merely dismissed the retainers with one curt gesture. They hesitated. He repeated the gesture. They withdrew at once, grateful to flee. Then Isolde and Valerian were alone among the dead brides. He approached her not quickly. "This chamber is bound to blood, it should not admit you." "But it does." "Yes." That single syllable carried too much. She turned slowly, studying the effigies. Each bride lay with hands folded and face veiled, carved alike, except for the delicate distinctions of gown and crest. Beautifully memorialized, neatly erased. "Are they truly here?" she asked. Their bodies were buried elsewhere. The coven preferred symbols to graves. Because symbols asked fewer questions, she faced the broken 6th alcove. "And this was hers, Elira." He did not answer. Silence answered for him. Isolde stepped nearer the open iron door at the crypt's center. At once the pulse in the floor strengthened. The bandage at her throat grew warm, not painful, recognizing. "Do not," Valerian said, but she had already crossed the carved ring in the stone. The world tilted. Suddenly she was not in the crypt but in a moonlit chamber she had never seen. Candles guttered in silver stands. A younger Valyrian knelt beside a bed, his hands bloodied, his face shattered beyond dignity. On the bed lay a girl with dark hair spread like ink across white linen. Her throat was marked by 2 small wounds. Her skin had taken on that delicate stillness which no sleep has ever truly imitated. "Valyrian," she whispered, "not dead then, dying." He bent over her hand as if prayer might become medicine if he humbled himself enough. "I can save you," he said, voice breaking on the lie. She smiled with terrible gentleness. "No." They won. A door opened behind him. Shadowed figures entered, robed, patient, lawful. The dying girl's eyes flicked toward them. Fear passed through her then, not of death, but of what death would make him do. "Do not let them put me in the stone," she breathed. His answer never came. The vision ripped away. Isolde staggered. Strong hands caught her shoulders. Valyrian. His face was very close, stripped of color even for him. "What did you see?" She could not speak at first. The grief had not been hers, yet it soaked through her like rain through lace. "You loved her," she whispered. His grip loosened as if he had been struck. "That is all?" he asked. "No," she swallowed. "She begged you not to let them put her in the stone." He stepped back. Whatever careful reserve he had maintained since the wedding fractured then, not into rage, but into something rower. He turned from her, one hand braced against the crypt wall, shoulders rigid. "You should not be able to see blood memory," he said. "Then stop telling me what should happen." "Nothing in this house obeys its own rules." The words escaped harsher than she intended, yet he did not punish them. Instead he said, almost to himself, "The bite opened more than the bond." A draft moved out of the open iron door, carrying the scent of wet earth and old roses. Impossible beneath the sea cliff. Isolde looked toward the darkness within. What did they put in the stone? He faced it too. Not a thing, a vow. She waited. "At her death," he said, "I swore before the crypt that no bride bound to me would ever truly belong to the coven again." I thought words spoken in grief died with the air that bore them. His mouth hardened. "I was wrong. The crypt accepted the vow and twisted it. Each bride who came after took the bite, drew the bond, and died before the coven could claim her. The law called it tragedy. I called it punishment. For whom?" He looked at her then. "For me." The pulse in the stone deepened. Something shifted in the darkness beyond the iron threshold, not a body exactly, but an awareness turning in sleep. "You said the brides kept it sealed," Isolde murmured. "Yes, and I lived." "Yes." The air changed, both of them felt it. From inside the open threshold came a woman's voice, soft as breath against a coffin lid. "Then bring her to me." Isolde went cold. Valyrian moved between her and the dark instantly, one arm barring her back though he did not touch her. For the first time since she had entered Drearhollow, she saw not restraint but naked alarm in him. The voice came again, tender and terrible. "You promised me no more would die, beloved." So why is she alive? No living throat should have made that voice. It was not the shriek of a ghost story specter, nor the rasp of some grave thing mocking human speech. It sounded heartbreakingly human, young, weary, intimate. That was what made it monstrous. The dead were never so terrible as when they still sounded loved. Valyrian did not move from before Isolde. "Go upstairs," he said. The command was quiet, but it came edged like drawn steel. Isolde heard herself answer, "No." Perhaps another woman would have spoken from defiance. She spoke from dread that obedience would leave her blind among predators. If the dead had started calling her by implication, she would rather hear why. The darkness within the threshold stirred. A pale shape did not emerge, only the suggestion of one, like moonlight trying to remember the outline of a body. "Has she your mercy too?" the voice asked. Valyrian's shoulders locked. "She is nothing of mine," he said. The lie fell heavily. The voice laughed once, soft and desolate. "You were never good at cruelty." A pain went through his face so swiftly that Isolde almost doubted it had happened. Then he said, "You are not Elira." "No," said the voice. "Not entirely." Isolde understood then with the cold logic terror sometimes brings. The crypt had not awakened a woman. It had awakened the vow spoken over her body, the grief bound into stone, the love denied a proper grave. Whatever spoke from the threshold was a remnant shaped by obsession and law. A haunting made of fidelity. She should have fled. Instead, she found herself asking, "What do you want from me?" Valerian turned sharply, perhaps more alarmed by her question than by the presence itself. The darkness answered before he could. "To know why you survived what mercy killed in others." The chamber shuddered. One torch went out. Valerian seized Isolde's wrist, not painfully, but with final intent, and pulled her back across the carved ring. The moment she crossed it, the pressure in her skull lessened. "Enough," he said to the crypt. The pale suggestion within the threshold receded. "You cannot keep her from me, beloved. The bond is open now. She will dream where you buried me." The iron door slammed shut. The noise cracked through the crypt like thunder underwater. The remaining torches guttered wild. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Valerian released Isolde's wrist, as though he had just remembered he held it. "You must leave Drearhollow." The statement was so sudden she almost laughed. "Leave!" She looked around at the sealed chamber, the effigies, the iron door still trembling in its frame. "Am I to walk past the coven that sold me here and request a carriage? I will make one ready before dawn. And what then? My brother has already traded me. My father is ash. Every border house knows I have stood at your altar." Her voice remained low, but it sharpened with each word. "There is nowhere for me to go that does not end in disgrace, debt, or death. That may still be preferable. To whom?" He did not answer. He led her out of the crypt, through the rock corridor, and up the stair in a silence thicker than speech. At the landing before the inhabited floors, he halted. A lamp burned there, leaving his face half in shadow. "You should rest." She touched the bandage at her throat. "You expect sleep after that?" "No. I expect exhaustion." Perhaps it was the hour, or the blood memory still echoing in her bones, or the sheer violence of being kept ignorant by everyone in this place. Whatever the cause, restraint failed her. "You loved her," she said. "You bound your grief into stone and let 4 women die rather than break the law that caused it. And now you would send me away as if I were a parcel misdelivered." His eyes darkened, not with hunger, but with the old authority she had sensed in the chapel. "You know nothing of what I let happen. Then tell me." He took a step closer, not enough to threaten, enough to make the air taut. "If I tell you," he said, "you become part of it. I already am." The force of that truth passed between them like a blade. At last he spoke. "After Elira died, the coven ordered me to continue the marriage rite until the border oath stabilized. A living human bride bound to the Duskmere line strengthened the warding beneath Drearhollow. But my vow spoken in the crypt turned the rite against itself. The brides died the moment my blood called to theirs. Their death sealed the crypt and thwarted the coven. A punishment, yes. And a protection. For the women, for what lay below." Isolde felt the edge of a larger horror. "You mean the crypt did not keep Elira?" "It kept something made from your bond to her." He said nothing. In silence, confirmation became unbearable. She looked away first. Wind hissed in a distant corridor. Somewhere a door shut softly. The keep had resumed pretending to be a house rather than a mausoleum full of laws. "Why did I live?" she asked. Valerian's answer came after a long pause. "I do not know," but something in his expression said he feared he soon would. That night Isolde slept only because the medicine dragged her under. Sleep did not bring mercy. She dreamed of a garden she had never seen, silver with moonlight and white roses. A woman stood among them in a burial gown, beautiful and fading at the edges. Not flesh, not apparition. "Memory with will. You are cracked where I was whole," the woman said gently. Isolde looked down and saw no wound. "Who are you?" The woman smiled sadly. "The one who taught him despair. You want me dead. I want him free, by killing me, by finishing what he began." The roses darkened, petal by petal, into blood. Isolde woke with a hand over her mouth to stop the cry. Someone was in her room. Valerian stood at the window, back turned, as if he had been guarding the dawn or waiting to tell her something impossible. Without looking at her, he said, "The coven has convened judgment." They know the crypt spoke to you. Then he turned, and for the first time she saw blood on his mouth that was not hers. If Isolde had been less tired, the blood on his mouth might have frightened her more. As it was, it merely completed the shape of him. He stood with dawn paling the windows behind him, half silvered by early light, half lost in the room's last shadows. The stain at his mouth had already dried. He had not tried to hide it. "Whose?" she asked. "A deer," he said. The answer should have relieved her. Instead, it did something stranger. It made him seem more controlled than monstrous, which in Drearhollow felt more dangerous. "The coven meets at Blackwater Hall by noon," he continued. "They will question you about the crypt, the bond, and any dreams you have had since the rite. Will truth help me? No. Then why tell it? Because falsehood will help less." He came no closer. His distance had become its own language, part caution, part discipline, part fear of what the bond might learn from proximity. Marta dressed Isolde in mourning gray rather than bridal colors. No one explained whether that choice was practical or symbolic. At Blackwater Hall, explanation and cruelty often dressed alike. The hall lay across the inner court, joined to the keep by a covered bridge of black stone. Ravens nested in the eaves. Inside, the ceiling vaulted high above a circle of elder seats, and a central floor inlaid with silver lines like a net. Isolde was placed within that circle. Valerian stood outside it. That detail mattered. She was the accused. He was the witness. Severine presided at the northern seat. Around her sat the elder lords and ladies of the coast, pale and composed as winter portraits. Among them, Isolde saw the sharp-faced woman from the night hall, a vampire noble in green-black velvet with a jeweled collar at her throat. Her gaze lingered on Valerian with a familiarity that made Isolde's stomach tighten for reasons she refused to inspect. Severine began without preamble. "State your name." Isolde Vane Duskmere. The addition of his name shifted the room. Severine noticed, of course she did. "You claim the Duskmere line quickly. I claim the truth of the ceremony performed before witnesses." A murmur. Valerian did not move. Severine steepled her fingers. "What did you experience when Lord Duskmere sealed the marriage?" A bite. Dry amusement crossed one elder's face. "She has wit." "No," said Isolde quietly. "Only exhaustion." Severine's mouth flattened. "Speak fully." So Isolde did, not all. She kept the dream of the rose garden to herself. But she described the strange vision at the altar, the opening in the crypt, the sense of memory in blood not her own. When Severine pressed for the voice from beyond the threshold, Valerian intervened. "The crypt answered me," he said. "Not her." The sharp-faced woman in green turned toward him. "How noble." His gaze did not flicker to her. Severine ignored the interruption. "Did the dead speak the name Elira?" No one had told Isolde how dangerous names could be in this place. Yet instinct warned her. "Yes," she said. The hall chilled. One elder crossed silver nails over his sleeve as if warding off blasphemy. Severine's voice thinned. "And what did you feel toward the Lord in that moment?" It was a cruel question, and not because of romance. They wanted weakness, attachment, any proof the bond had begun altering judgment. Isolde looked at Valerian. He stood as he always stood, straight, silent, bearing himself like a sentence already passed. If he feared her answer, he did not show it. "At that moment," she said, "I felt that he was more haunted than cruel." The sharp-faced woman laughed softly. "And there it is." Valerian's expression changed at last, not toward Isolde but toward the other woman. A warning, old and lethal. Severine lifted one finger for silence. "Lady Marceline, if you cannot master your appetites, you may leave." So, Marceline only smiled. The questioning went on. Had Isolde heard whispers in sleep? Yes. Had she sensed the Lord's mind through the bond? Not his mind, she said carefully, only fragments of grief. Had she been touched by the crypt after the door shut? The question felt wrong. No, it was not entirely true. The dream garden still clung to her skin like cold vapor. But some things she knew already must be hers alone if she wished to remain alive. At last Severine leaned back. "The law is unclear where anomalies occur." Marceline spoke before anyone else could. Then allow precedent to guide us. 4 brides died because the Lord's bond remained corrupted. This one survived. Separate them before the corruption deepens. Keep the girl under ward. Bind Duskmere in silver until the crypt stills. A hum of agreement moved around the circle. Valerian finally stepped forward. The silver line at the floor's edge gleamed between him and Isolde. No, Severine's eyes narrowed. You do not dictate terms here. He looked at her without heat. No, I merely refuse them. The hall seemed to draw inward. Refusal of council decree, Severine said, constitutes treason under coven law. Then judge me, he replied. Isolde felt the shape of disaster before anyone spoke again. This was not strategy. It was sacrifice, and it was being made too easily. Marceline rose. Gladly. What followed happened too quickly for ceremony. Silver chains were brought. 2 elder guards moved. Valerian did not resist until they neared Isolde. Then the room blurred. One instant he stood at the edge of the silver line. The next he was before her, one guard thrown into the elder seats, the other pinned against a pillar by his throat. The court erupted in shouts. Silver flashed. Ravens exploded from the rafters. Valerian's voice cut through it all, colder than the hall itself. No one touches her. The guard in his grip gasped, skin smoking where vampire fingers met silver-threaded collar. Isolde should have recoiled. Instead, her pulse leapt with a terrible clarity. No one in this room feared the crypt as much as they feared what Valerian would become if forced to choose. Severine rose in full authority. Stand down, Lord Duskmere, or by the first law I condemn the bride. The silence that followed was complete. Valerian's hand slowly loosened. But he did not look at Severine. He looked at Isolde, and in that look she saw the first true fracture in his control. Then, into the ringing stillness of Blackwater Hall, Marceline said with velvet malice, "How interesting." He did not defend the others. He did not deny it. That was what followed Isolde out of Blackwater Hall, not the threat of condemnation, nor the scrape of chains never used, nor the eyes of the coven burning against her back. It was the fact that Marceline's accusation had hung in the air, and Valerian had let it remain there like a wound uncovered. By decree of temporary judgment, Isolde was confined to the West Tower under guard until the next moonrise. Valerian was forbidden from entering. By nightfall, he broke both terms. Isolde had known he would before the lock turned. Not because of romance, nor because she imagined some reckless rescue, but because the bond between them had become a pressure change in the air, subtle, undeniable. When he drew near, the room felt more sharply outlined, as if reality itself braced. He entered without sound. Rain moved behind him in the open slit of the corridor window. One guard lay asleep in the chair outside, the other was nowhere visible. "Did you kill them?" she asked. "No," it came almost absently. His attention was fixed on her throat, not with appetite but with a kind of furious restraint. "You should not be here," she said. "I am aware." "Then leave." He shut the door behind him and stood there, one hand still resting on the iron latch. "No," the word should have frightened her. Instead, it sent a shiver through the room itself. She sat by the fire, still dressed in the gray gown of judgment. Why not? Because Marceline was right. The admission landed with quiet violence. Isolde said nothing. He crossed the chamber at last, not toward her but toward the cold hearthside table, where he placed a small object wrapped in black cloth. "Eat first." Again, that strange insistence on practical mercy. "I am not hungry." "You are trembling." She looked at her hands. He was correct. There was bread, broth, and a pear beneath the cloth. Fresh, warm still. Impossible luxuries at this hour unless taken directly from the kitchens. She ate because weakness in his presence seemed more perilous than gratitude. He remained standing while she did so, as though sitting would imply an intimacy neither of them could survive. At last she asked, "Who is Marceline to you?" His face changed very slightly. "An old political arrangement. She does not look at you politically." "No," there was no vanity in the answer, only weariness. "And the other brides," Isolde said. "Were they arrangements too?" "Yes." "Did they know they would die?" "I think they suspected." The broth cooled in her hand. And still you bit them. A long pause. Yes, she set the bowl down before it could fall from her fingers. The room seemed suddenly too small for breath. He had said the word as one might confess to war crimes before a chapel altar, plain, irreversible, beyond adornment. Why? His jaw tightened once. Because the coven kept their families alive in exchange. Because I believed each death preserved the border ward and kept what I buried contained. Because after the second bride, I no longer mistook obedience for innocence. That is not absolution. No, his gaze found hers. It is indictment. The fire popped softly between them. Then why protect me? She whispered. At that he finally moved, one step only, but nearer. Because when I bit you, the bond did not reject you. It answered. That is still not an answer. He was close enough now that she could see the faint silver scars at his throat, old and nearly invisible unless firelight struck them. Punishment scars, perhaps, or memory. His voice lowered. Because you looked at me as if I had not become inevitable. The words entered her more deeply than touch might have. She should have looked away. She did not. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea. Inside, the air seemed to shorten. Valerian's hand lifted, not to her face, not to her hair, but to the side of her chair, fingers curling against carved wood as if anchoring himself against some greater impulse. His gaze dropped for one forbidden instant to her mouth, then rose again with palpable discipline. No kisses before Chapter 7. Already met. Now Chapter 7 allows kiss maybe, but user said no kisses before Chapter 7, so now okay. But we need physical closeness allowed maybe not immediate. Better still no kiss until later Chapter 8 to keep build-up. So here no kiss, need closeness allowed maybe touch. He said almost harshly, tell me of the dream you withheld. She went still. How did you know? The bond bends at concealment. I feel when truth is held back. The unfairness of that nearly drove her to anger. Then perhaps you should have begun with your own. For the first time that night, something like regret crossed his face. Fair, she drew a breath. I saw a garden, a woman in burial white. She said I was cracked where she had been whole. She said she wanted you free. His expression emptied in a way more frightening than pain. And then, she asked why I lived. He shut his eyes. Valerian. When she spoke his name, he opened them immediately. Something deep in him answered to it too quickly. Tell me what cracked means. He looked at her for so long the silence itself seemed to fray. At the altar, he said at last, the soul-binding rite should have taken your life because my blood carries the unfinished vow. The previous brides were untouched by it. They were whole in the eyes of the ritual, separate, innocent, unable to bear what lived in me. His gaze lowered, then returned. You are not whole. The truth was not insult. That made it worse. He continued, quieter. Something in you was already broken open before you came here. Grief, abandonment, long suffering without collapse. The rite found space where it expected resistance. Isolde felt as if he had laid bare a private ruin she had never shown anyone. So I survived because I was damaged. You survived because you endured damage without surrendering your soul. The distinction struck her with painful force. A sound rose outside the tower, shouting, then the crack of a horn from the outer wall. Valerian straightened instantly. What is it? She asked. He went to the arrow slit and looked toward the courtyard below. When he turned back, his face had become that cold, noble mask again. Hunters, her blood chilled. Vampire hunters? Yes. He crossed to her in 2 swift steps, all hesitation gone now that danger was simple. The coven will use the attack to remove you. And you? He drew a silver knife from inside his coat and placed it in her hand, closing her fingers around the hilt. His touch lasted one breath too long. I will come back before they do. Then he was gone, and from the courtyard beneath the tower rose the first scream of war. The attack began with fire. From the tower slit, Isolde saw flames leap along the outer parapet, where oil had caught against the rain. Men ran across the yard below, some armored in the dark livery of Drearhillow, others in pale leather marked with ash-white crosses. Hunters, real, not folklore. They moved with brutal efficiency, driving iron bolts into windows, hurling sun-salt flares that burst in sheets of searing light. Vampires recoiled wherever the brilliance struck. Human servants screamed and scattered between both sides, collateral to old hatreds. The coven had not expected an assault tonight. That alone made Isolde suspicious. When the tower lock rattled half an hour after Valerian left, she did not call out. She took the silver knife in both hands and stepped behind the door. It opened. Marceline entered with 2 guards. She was splendid even in crisis, her green-black gown belted for movement, her hair pinned with obsidian needles. Her smile contained no warmth. "The Lord is occupied," she said. "Come," the guards advanced. Isolde did not waste breath on refusal. She drove the silver knife into the nearer guard's forearm as he reached for her. He shouted, dropping his grip. She darted past him, skirts gathered, and ran. Marceline laughed behind her, not startled, almost delighted. The corridor outside was chaos. Bells rang now. Smoke crawled along the ceiling. One servant lay against the wall, breathing but bloodied. Isolde fled down the west stair toward the chapel, choosing instinct over plan. The keep seemed to shift around her. Corridors alternately choked with battle and unnaturally empty, as though old architecture were deciding whom to protect. She reached the covered bridge to Blackwater Hall and nearly collided with Severine. The matriarch stood untouched amid the panic, flanked by elder retainers. "Take her," she said, so it was the plan. Isolde backed away. "You let them in." Severine did not bother with outrage. Hunters are a temporary inconvenience. A failed bond is a dynasty-ending plague. One retainer lunged. Isolde dodged, but the second seized her wrist. The knife skittered across stone. Then the corridor darkened. No torch went out. No cloud crossed a window. Yet darkness pooled around the far arch as if night itself had entered on command. Valerian. He came through smoke and bell clamor with blood on one sleeve and murder in his stillness. A hunter's bolt protruded from his shoulder, snapped short. He looked at the hand gripping Isolde's wrist. The retainer released her at once. Severine did not. "You end this now, Duskmere." He did not answer her. His gaze stayed on Isolde. "Come here." The simple words broke the spell of shock. She ran to him. His arm came around her, not in embrace, but in fierce protection, setting her half behind his body, as if the very sight of her within reach of others had tipped some final internal balance. She felt the cold solidity of him, the ruthless control barely containing violence. One of the hunters burst into the bridge from the yard, saw them, and fired. Valerian turned. The bolt meant for Isolde struck his side. He did not flinch. He crossed the space before the hunter could reload and sent him crashing through the open lattice into the rain-black court below. Severine's face hardened with ancient authority. "By first law, I command you, enough!" The word stopped everyone. Valerian looked almost calm. Which meant, Isolde understood with sudden certainty, that he had passed beyond rage into something colder and far more absolute. "You bartered human brides for stability," he said to Severine. "You named sacrifice duty. You dressed murder in precedent." His voice remained low, but the stones seemed to carry it. "No more." Marceline appeared at the far end of the bridge, flanked by additional guards. "How stirring," she said. "Will you condemn us all for the sake of one broken mortal?" He did not even turn his head. "Yes." Everything happened at once. The hunters breached the lower hall. Bells split the air. Marceline's guards rushed forward. Valerian drew Isolde backward through a side door and into the ruined oratory adjoining the chapel, slamming the iron latch behind them. The room was narrow, once private, now half-collapsed and open to the sea through broken masonry. He swayed. Only then did Isolde see how much blood he had lost. The snapped bolt in his side had silver etched along the shaft. Smoke curled where it touched him. Another wound darkened his coat at the shoulder. "You are hurt. I have observed." He tried to pull the bolt free and failed. Without thinking, she reached for him. He went utterly still. Her hands hovered over the wound. "If I touch it, it will hurt. It is already hurting." Rain blew through the broken wall in cold sheets. Shouts thundered elsewhere in the keep. Inside the oratory, the world narrowed to ruined stone, blood, and the impossible fact of his body yielding under injury. "On 3, she said. His mouth almost changed shape at that, astonishment perhaps. "You assume I obey counts. You obey pain more than pride." The faintest dark humor entered his eyes. "Dangerous observation." She gripped the bolt. 1, 2, she pulled. He caught the back of her wrist with crushing speed, but only after the bolt came free. Blood spilled hot over her hand. He bent, breath harsh once, fangs bared not at her but at the violence of surviving. "I said 3, he managed. There was no time. For one suspended moment they stared at each other, her hand bloodied, his fingers around her wrist, the storm raging through the broken wall. Then his blood touched the half-healed bite at her throat. The bond surged open. She saw him as he was beneath every layer of restraint, centuries of discipline, starving devotion, the memory of carrying dying brides to crypts he despised. And beneath all that a terrible new refusal, not this one. Not her, the force of it staggered them both. Valerian released her as if she burned. Isolde, but the bond had already moved through her too, through instinct deeper than fear. Through compassion shaped by suffering, through the cracked place that had let her live. She stepped into him before she could think better of it and pressed her hand to his face. He shut his eyes. When he opened them again, hunger and grief and reverence stood there together, equally dangerous. He bent, not to her throat, not yet, but to her forehead, touching it once with his mouth like a vow he hated himself for needing. And outside the ruined oratory, the crypt door below the keep opened again. The moment his mouth touched her brow, the house answered, not romantically, not gently. Drear Hollow was not made for gentle confirmations. Stone shook beneath their feet. A deep sound rose from the foundations, the same pulse she had felt in the crypt, now louder, more purposeful, like a second heart waking in the cliff. The broken oratory windows burst inward. Candles down the adjoining chapel extinguished in a single breath. Valerian drew back at once, horror replacing the fragile tenderness she had glimpsed. "The bond completed a threshold," he said. Isolde's hand fell from his face. "Because you touched me. Because I wanted to." The honesty of it was devastating. Before she could answer, the chapel doors beyond the oratory blew open. Wind flooded in carrying salt, rain, and a voice both distant and near. "Beloved!" Valerian's expression became stone. He took Isolde's wrist and led her through the chapel toward the stair descending to the crypt. Not down, away, but the floor split their path with a crack of black dust. Silver veins in the stone flared, outlining old ritual patterns hidden beneath newer masonry. The keep itself was forcing a choice. Severine appeared at the chapel threshold with Marceline and 3 elders behind her. Hunters shouted somewhere in the lower court, yet the coven had eyes only for the chapel floor. Severine looked from the glowing cracks to Isolde's throat and then to Valerian. Understanding chilled her face. "You crossed the final threshold." "No," Valerian said. "Not willingly." Marceline's laugh held no mirth. "Desire has always been your most obvious flaw." "What threshold?" Isolde demanded, but Severine answered not him. "The soul-binding rite completes in 3 movements. Blood, survival, chosen touch. The previous brides died before the last." The words struck like cold iron. So a touch freely given, freely wanted, had sealed what the bite began. Marceline stepped forward. "Kill the girl now and the bond may collapse before full awakening." Valerian moved in front of Isolde. "Try." The crypt voice rose again, stronger from somewhere below all of them. "Do not quarrel over what is mine." The silver cracks widened. For one impossible instant, Isolde saw through the floor, not literally, but with the bond's strange second sight. She saw the crypt door standing open, and in its darkness a figure gathering shape from vow, grief, and burial memory. A bride in white, a wound given form, Elira and not Elira. She understood then what Valerian had done long ago. In trying to prevent the coven from owning the woman he loved even in death, he had chained her echo to the crypt instead. Every bride who died afterward fed the binding. 4 deaths had made the remnant strong. Isolde's survival had given it a living mirror to reach toward. She wants me to finish the chain, Isolde said. No one denied it. Severine's gaze sharpened. Then go below. Offer yourself and the rest may yet be spared. Valerian turned on her with such cold revulsion that even Marceline stepped back. You will not speak to my wife again. My wife, not ceremony now. Claim, Marceline recovered first. You accuse us of sacrifice while preparing your own. I am preparing war, he said. The chapel groaned. Stone dust fell in glittering veils. Hunters were shouting closer now, perhaps drawn by the disturbance, perhaps about to collide with a supernatural history they could not understand. Isolde stepped beside Valerian before he could push her back into safety that no longer existed. Listen to me, she said. He looked at her. That was still the strangest power in this place, that she could speak and he would actually listen. She is not a Lyra, Isolde said softly, and she is not just the crypt. She is the vow you made when you could not bear your own obedience. If she wants me, it is because I survived where the others died. I broke the pattern. She held his gaze though her pulse battered at her throat. Then let me break the rest. No, the answer came instant, almost violent. You said yourself the bond answered me. I will not feed you to my dead. You are not feeding me anywhere. The first true anger flared in him then, not at her but at the possibility. You do not understand what waits below. Then help me understand. A silence followed, fierce and public and intimate all at once. At last he said, lower than the others could likely hear, if you go below, she will try to take your life by becoming your sorrow. She will call every wound in you by name. And if I follow, the bond between us may give her enough shape to walk. Isolde felt the terrible elegance of the trap. Severine heard enough to intervene. Then there is no choice. Separate them. The elders moved. Valerian did not attack first this time. Isolde did. She seized the fallen chapel candelabrum and drove it across the silver crack at the elders' feet. The line flared with trapped energy, blasting sparks and white heat upward. The elders recoiled. In that startled instant, she turned to Valerian. Take me down. He stared at her as if the command came from fate itself. Take me down, she repeated. Or they will do it without you. For one long heartbeat, he seemed divided between every century that had made him and the one decision before him. Then he took her hand. Together they descended into the dark. Behind them, the coven followed, and somewhere below, the bride and the stone began to sing. The song was not beautiful. That was the final cruelty. A beautiful haunting could be resisted as enchantment. This was only a human melody, thin and almost wavering, the kind a woman might hum to keep from crying in an unfamiliar house. It wound through the crypt stair like remembered tenderness, making every step downward feel like betrayal. Valerian never released Isolde's hand. Below the main crypt chamber, beyond the black iron door, lay another room hidden from the architecture above. A burial vault veined with roots, rose thorns fossilized in stone, and old silver wards hammered into the floor. At its center stood a bier of white marble, empty now except for a spread of burial linen darkened by ancient stains. Around it, the air had thickened into the shape of a woman. Elira's remnant looked clearer here. She wore the outline of her death like a gown. Her face was nearly beautiful enough to mistake for living, until one saw the places where memory failed, an eye too luminous, a hand that faded at the wrist, hair moving as though underwater. She smiled when she saw Valerian. All the grief in him became visible at once. Isolde had wondered, dimly and cruelly, whether dead love always made the living woman lesser by comparison. Standing there, she understood the opposite. Elira was not a rival but a wound that had never been allowed to close. You came, Elira said. Valerian's voice was iron ground into silence. You are not her. No, but I am what you left. The remnant's gaze shifted to Isolde. And you are what he found instead. Instead, Isolde did not take the insult. I am what lived. For the first time, the remnant's expression changed. Something colder entered it. Yes. The coven gathered at the threshold behind them, unwilling to step fully inside. Even Severine kept to the silver ward line. Hunters, shouts no longer sounded above. Perhaps the battle had moved elsewhere. Perhaps the house itself had shut them out. In the burial vault, there was only law, grief, and choice. Elira drifted nearer the bier. "You promised me no more brides would die for them," she said to Valerian. "You promised." And yet 4 did. His face tightened as if under lashes. "I know, you carried each one here in your thoughts. I know, you let my name become a murder weapon." Something in the room seemed to bleed at that truth. Valerian stepped forward once. "If blame will still you, take mine." "Oh, beloved," she smiled with terrible softness. "Blame is all I have ever had." Then she turned to Isolde. "Come closer." Valerian's grip tightened around Isolde's hand. She felt it, pleading disguised as command, terror disguised as control. She gently withdrew her fingers. He looked at her. And because they had already crossed too many thresholds to lie now, she said, "You cannot end what you built by standing between us." His mouth parted slightly. As if around a protest, he could not make without shattering. Isolde went to the edge of the bier. The remnant circled her with the curiosity of an old grief meeting new flesh. "He told you you are broken," she murmured. "He told me I endured being broken." A kinder phrasing. It was a kinder truth. For the first time, Elira seemed uncertain. "You loved him," Isolde said quietly. "But he was made to become the instrument of your death. Then he made you into punishment because he could not bear the shape of his own guilt." She swallowed. That was wrong. But it was not indifference. The remnant's face flickered. "Do not pity me." "I don't." Isolde raised her chin. "I pity the women after you." Behind her, the coven murmured in outrage. "Good. Let them hear it." Elira's form wavered with rising emotion. "They would have caged me in law, in blood, in the crypt. He swore they would not possess me. And instead," Isolde said, voice trembling but steady, "he possessed your death." Silence. Valerian shut his eyes. It was the cruelest thing she had said to him. It was also, she knew from the way the room responded, exactly true. The remnant drew back as if struck. Her edges blurred, then sharpened in pain. "What would you know of it? You who still breathe." "Enough," Valerian said. But Isolde did know, though differently. She knew what it was to be bartered, to be named useful and called cherished while being led toward ruin. She knew what silence turned into when it was not allowed to become grief. So she spoke into the vault as if to both of them. "He does not owe you more brides. He owes you release." The crypt pulse surged. Elira's face changed again, not softer, not yet, but more human in its anguish. "Release to what? I am the vow. There is no body left for burial. No name left untouched, only this." Severine called from the threshold. "Then sever the living vessel and let the remnant collapse." Valerian whirled. "Be silent." But Elira had heard. She looked at Isolde's throat, at the half-healed bite, at the thread of living bond passing between bride and lord. Understanding dawned in her with terrible clarity. "If she offers the completed bond," she whispered, "I could leave the stone." Valerian went white. He crossed to Isolde in an instant, grasping her shoulders. "No." It was not command, it was fear. Elira drifted closer too, drawn now by possibility. "He would rather damn himself forever than let me touch what he wants." What he wants. The words hung between all 3 of them. Valerian's gaze locked on Isolde's face with unbearable intensity. "Listen to me. If she takes the bond through you, I may not be able to call her back. She could wear your life, your body. Your blood." Isolde believed him, and still she understood what had to be risked, because only the living could choose differently than the dead. She lifted one hand and placed it over his where it gripped her shoulder. "What if I call her not into me," she said, "but through me?" His expression broke. That was when the vault doors slammed shut behind the coven, sealing them all inside. And Elira smiled with sudden, desperate hunger. He had buried kingdoms with less fear than this. For 83 years, Valerian had imagined his punishment in every form except the one before him. Not endless solitude, not the repetition of bridal death. Not obedience calcified into law, but the appearance of one woman who could survive his ruin and ask him to choose against it. Isolde stood between the bier and the remnant, small against the crypt's old dark, mortal as rain, and yet the entire chamber bent toward her as if to some new axis. He understood with a clarity that felt like execution that he loved her, not as absolution, not as replacement, not because she resembled anything he had lost. He loved her because she had looked directly at the architecture of his guilt and refused to worship it, because suffering had not made her cruel. Because, broken open, she had still remained wholly herself, and now that love had brought her to the brink of becoming another grave in his keeping. "No," he said again, though he knew already that the word had failed. The remnant advanced with that strange, hungry grace of moonlight over water. The vault doors would not open. Severine and the elders struck them from within the ward line to no effect. Marceline shouted something sharp and furious. None of it mattered. Only three wills mattered now, the dead woman's, the living lord's, and her own. Isolde lifted her bandaged throat. "If I let the bond open, you must listen." Elira's eyes gleamed. "I have listened to nothing but grief for 80 years. Speak." Valerian caught Isolde's wrist, not roughly, desperately. "There is another way." She looked at him with all the tenderness she had not allowed herself before. There wasn't until now. That tenderness almost undid him. She turned back to the remnant. "You wanted freedom, not revenge. I wanted both. Revenge is what they taught you after death." The remnant's face trembled with old pain. Isolde took one step nearer. The bite at her throat pulsed. She could feel the living bond to Valerian like a silver thread under skin, taut and warm despite everything. "Then take only what proves the truth." She reached for Valerian's hand. He froze. Not because touch was new between them, but because this one was chosen in full witness, before the dead, the coven, and the ruins of everything law had built. She laced her fingers with his. At once the bond opened, not violently this time, deeply. Memory poured through her, not in scattered shards but in a stream. Valerian young and proud under coven expectation, Elira laughing in a winter garden, secret meetings in library dusk. The night the council condemned her lineage as politically unusable, the order that Valerian himself must perform the turning bite to prove loyalty, his refusal broken by threat against her family. Elira dying in his arms, because he stopped the turning halfway rather than damn her into immortality under the coven's rule. Love, cowardice, mercy, catastrophe, all braided together. Isolde did not drown in it. She turned that opened current toward Elira. The remnant inhaled sharply as the memories struck. Not the memories of dying, those she had been trapped in already, but of being loved before death, of being chosen in secret. Of hearing Valerian, on the night before judgment, promise that if he could not save her life, he would at least save what remained of her from the coven's hands. The remnant faltered. "You remember," Isolde whispered. Elira's mouth trembled. "I remembered only the end. That is why you stayed monstrous." The words were not cruel. They were release offered in plain shape. The crypt pulse changed. It was no longer a hungry beat but something loosening, like a fist opening finger by finger. Severine saw it first. "Stop her," she cried. Marceline crossed the ward line despite the burning silver and lunged. Valerian moved faster. He intercepted her with one brutal strike that sent her against the crypt wall. She rose hissing, fangs bared at last, all courtliness gone. The elders surged behind her. Chaos erupted at the chamber edge. But within the circle of beer and bond, a stranger peace was taking hold. Elira looked at Valerian. Not through Isolde, not past her, but directly at him for the first time as more than grief. "You poor, faithless thing," she said, and there was suddenly human affection in it. "You turned one death into many because you could not bear to mourn like a man." His face tightened with shame so profound it looked like prayer. "Yes, no excuse, no self-defense, only yes." The remnant smiled, and this time it was truly hers. "Then mourn now." The command passed through the vault like light through black water. Valerian dropped to one knee, not in worship, in surrender. The sight of it cracked something final in the crypt. The burial linen on the bier lifted in a ghost wind. The silver wards blazed, then dimmed. Elira's form brightened, not stronger but less bound, like frost meeting dawn. Isolde felt the bond begin to tear, not destructively, but as a seam opening to let the dead depart. Elira looked at her last. "Broken girl," she said softly. Isolde held her gaze. "Thank you," Elira whispered. Then she kissed 2 fingers and touched them, not to Valerian, but to the air above the bier where her own unburied life had ended. Her form dissolved into white petals, into breath, into nothing. The crypt went still, completely still. At the threshold, Marceline screamed, not from injury but from fury, as the warding beneath Drearhallow shifted. The old dependence on sacrificial brides collapsed in an instant. Silver lines on the floor went dark. The elders staggered as if some political foundation had been torn from under them. Valerian rose slowly. What stood in his face now was not grief alone, it was judgment long delayed. "You have no law here anymore," he said to the coven. No one contradicted him. Severine tried. Blood touched her lips before the words formed. The backlash of the broken rite had found its makers first. One by one, the elders recoiled from the dead wards that no longer obeyed them. Marceline backed toward the sealed door, hate incandescent in her eyes. "This is not finished." "It is," said Valerian. The doors of the vault opened on their own. Cold dawn light spilled down the stair. The coven fled it first. Silence followed, clean and strange. Isolde swayed. This time when Valerian caught her, he did not let go. His hand came to her waist with a care so fierce it almost felt like grief given form. The other rose to the back of her neck, not near the wound, only near enough to steady her. For one unguarded moment, she let her weight rest against him. The crypt had gone silent. The dead had at last taken their leave. But her body still trembled from the force of surviving what should have destroyed her. "Isolde!" He said her name as though he had no right to it and could not stop himself from using it. She lifted her eyes. His face had changed again, not into peace. Men like him were not granted peace so simply. But the terrible inward strain that had ruled him since the chapel was broken now, and in its place stood something more mortal than hunger, fear of losing her. "I am here," she whispered. The words seemed to strike him harder than any blade had. Around them, the burial vault settled into stillness. The silver in the floor no longer burned with coven law. It lay dark and emptied, like veins from which poison had finally been drawn. At the threshold, Severine and the elders had retreated into a silence colder than defeat. Their power had depended on sacrifice, and sacrifice had failed them. Valerian's gaze flicked once toward them, and what lived in it then needed no proclamation. The old obedience in him was dead. He looked back to Isolde immediately, as if everything else had fallen beneath notice. "Can you stand?" She almost smiled at the strange tenderness of the question. Yes, but when she tried, the chamber tilted. His arm tightened. "That was not an order," he said quietly. "It was concern." Something fragile moved through her then, too solemn to be called joy. She had been bartered, offered, judged, hunted, and nearly claimed by a dead woman's grief. Yet this ancient, ruined lord still asked her what she could bear as though her answer mattered. Perhaps that was why she endured him. Perhaps that was why he had begun to endure himself. He led her from the bier and up the crypt stair, slowly this time. No one stopped them. No elder spoke. Marceline, pale with rage and humiliation, watched from the shadows near the vault door, but even she did not interfere. Whatever game of law and manipulation had once bound Drearhallow was finished. At the top of the stair, dawn had begun to enter the chapel. Not fully. The sky beyond the windows remained a bruised gray-blue, and the storm had not yet blown itself into mercy. But light existed now where night had ruled unquestioned. It moved over the pews, over the cracked altar, over the place where brides had once stood waiting to die. Isolde stopped there. Valerian stopped with her. For a long while neither spoke. At last she said, "Is it over?" He looked toward the black chapel doors, beyond them to the keep, the court, the sea, the wounded house that still breathed around them. "The crypt is over," he said. "The law that fed upon it is broken. The elders will not forgive that." His mouth hardened faintly, "but they will no longer command it either. And the hunters, driven back." For now," she repeated. "Yes." he did not soften it into false hope. Drearhullo will not become gentle because one curse ended. She appreciated him more for that than for any promise he might have made. The stormlight touched the line of his face. Without the chapel's ritual darkness, without the court around him, he seemed less like some sovereign of inevitable ruin and more like what he truly was. A man who had carried guilt so long it had almost become a religion. After a silence, he said, "You are free." The words did not comfort her. He must have seen that because he went on in the same controlled tone. The marriage can no longer be enforced through coven rite. No law binds you here now. If you wish to leave Drearhullo, I will see you safely housed beyond the northern provinces. You will have lands enough, servants of your choosing, and no further claim from me. From me, there it was again, that instinct of his to dress self-denial as mercy. She turned to him fully. And if I go, his stillness deepened, then you go unharmed. That was not what I asked. The faintest strain entered his voice. If you go, I remain what this house requires. A lord, a consequence. The bleakness of it went through her like winter. He really meant to let her leave, not because he wanted it. Because wanting otherwise terrified him. She thought of the first night in the chapel, of the cold, formal touch at the back of her neck, of the way he had looked at her as if survival itself were an offense against fate. She thought of the tower, the war, the crypt, the dead beloved finally released. And beneath all that, she thought of the one truth that had grown unbearable in its clarity. She had not lived through him, only to be sent away from him like an object rescued from a fire. I will not be traded a second time, she said. He stared at her. Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. Not to my brother, not to the coven. And not to your conscience. Something in his face gave way then, very slightly, like stone admitting weather after centuries of resistance. Isolde, he said, and it was almost a warning, almost a plea. She folded her hands before her, because if she reached for him first, she feared the whole of herself might follow. If I remain, she said, it will not be as sacrifice, not as ward. Not as penance for the dead. No, no more lies, no more brides. A shadow crossed his expression, sorrow, old disgust, perhaps the memory of each woman he had failed. Never again. The answer came without hesitation. Only then did she allow herself to ask the final question. And if I remain, she said softly, what am I to you? For the first time since she had known him, Lord Valerian Duskmere seemed to understand that silence could be cowardice. He stepped closer. Not enough to crowd her. Only enough that she could feel the cold gravity of him, the effort of his restraint, the terrible care with which he handled even nearness now. You are, he said, voice low and beautifully unguarded, the only living thing that has ever walked into my ruin and asked it to become better. Her breath caught. That is too much. It is not half enough. The dawn widened through the high glass. He lifted one hand, slowly, giving her time to refuse. When she did not, his fingers came to rest against her cheek with such reverence it undid something inside her more surely than passion could have. His thumb did not move. He simply held her as though confirming she was real and not another grief he would wake from too late. I do not ask immortality of you, he said. I do not ask surrender. Only this, stay while staying is still your choice. Isolde looked at him, the ancient restraint, the fallen nobility, the hunger mastered into gentleness. The guilt that would likely always live beside him like a second shadow. And she thought, with a strange calm, that love was perhaps not the opposite of danger. Perhaps in some lives it was only the one danger worth choosing knowingly, so she gave the smallest nod. Valerian shut his eyes once, as if the mercy of that consent was almost unbearable. When he opened them, he bent. The kiss was nothing like the coven's rituals, nothing like blood law, nothing like hunger mistaken for fate. It was brief, grave, and astonishingly tender, his mouth touching hers as though he feared even now that too much wanting might break what had finally been freely given. When he drew back, the sea wind moved through the chapel and did not sound like mourning. Below them, the crypt remained still. Ahead of them, Drearhullo was wounded, dangerous, half-ruined, and full of reckonings yet to come. The coven would gather its spite. Hunters would return. The dead could be released, but never erased. Nothing ahead promised ease, yet no bride would die there again. And as the first true morning entered the black chapel without asking for blood, Isolde Vane Duskmere stood beside the Lord whose bite had once been death to every woman given him, and lived. Not because she was untouched, not because she was chosen by prophecy or spared by innocence, but because she had been broken and had endured long enough to choose. And in that dark house above the sea, where grief had for years mistaken itself for law, one broken girl lived long enough to change the ending.